This is Love Notes, daily devotions from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. Grace and peace to you. Well, we continue today hearing what Eliphaz has to say to his suffering friend Job. So far, it's not been very helpful. So maybe just by the volume of his words over these chapters, he'll get to something that helps. But I kind of doubt it. Eliphaz continues at the 5th chapter, the 8th verse. As for me, I would seek God, and to God I would commit my cause. As if Job hasn't thought of that. Job's whole cry is to ask why. Why am I here? That's a question only God can answer. Job has proved himself over a lifetime to be faithful. And yet Eliphaz now says, well, I would seek God, so I suggest that you would do the same. And then he kind of gives Job some school. Ever had anybody do this when you're suffering? Maybe you've done it. God does great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number. Yeah. He gives rain on the earth and sends water on the fields. Yeah. And he gives this long list of things about how grand and glorious God is. I don't think that's Job's question. Then he gets to verse 17 and he says, how happy is the one whom God reproves. Therefore, do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. And now we turn to another time-honored way of dealing with people suffering when we give advice. This is good for you. This suffering is going to make you a better person. God wounds, but he also binds up. He strikes, but his hands heal. He will deliver you from 6 troubles. In 7, no harm will touch you. So when God's done disciplining you, then everything will be okay. Now, it may be true that in the midst of our suffering, I've seen it over and over and over again in my own life and in the life of others, that out of suffering, God manages to bring hope and depth and strength. But I don't think that means that God causes it in order for us to become better people. It's not God's discipline. It's that God enters into our suffering, sits there with us, and helps us to find a path forward. That's different than saying God is giving you something that's good for you. It's kind of a straighten up and fly right sort of advice. God, through Eliphaz, is going to proclaim to Job that he needs to straighten up his life and to fly right, and then everything will be okay. Now, the unspoken truth here is that Eliphaz has either never noticed or has ignored and is in denial the fact that God does seem to, at times, not hear or deliver us right away. That there are dark nights of the soul that have been chronicled by the spiritual masters of the Christian tradition and other traditions for as long as there have been humans. There are these periods when physically, emotionally, and spiritually we go through the darkest nights. We are tormented, and God seems to be absent. Why? It's a mystery. Are we in the way and not letting God get to us? Is God distant on purpose? Ultimately, I think it's probably above our pay grade to figure that out. Eliphaz then continues. He continues with the advice that I've often given to people, trying to give them some perspective, if you will. You shall know that your descendants will be many, and your offspring like the grass of the earth. You shall come to your grave in ripe old age, as a shock of grain comes up to the threshing floor. See, we have searched this out. It is true. Hear and know it for yourself. In other words, everything's going to be fine, Job. Just straighten up and fly right, and God will grant you all good things. It's going to be fine. Today's bad, tomorrow will be better. I'm not sure anybody who's in the midst of deep, deep suffering and feeling abandoned by God ever truly believes that. How could Eliphaz have testified to God's faithfulness without telling Job everything will be fine? Because sometimes it's not. Sometimes the diagnosis from the doctor ends up to realizing that it's not going to be fine, that death awaits us. Sometimes the suffering of the world is so immense in warfare and in disaster and other places that we know it's not going to be fine. It's never going to be the same. In the midst of our suffering comes the reality that sometimes we are in the dark and all we can do is cry out from it. Amen.